When the overseer's dogs found the first hole beneath the old magnolia tree in December of 1867, 20 years after her death, no one could have imagined what they were about to uncover. What lay buried in that Mississippi soil would not only reveal the extraordinary secret of a woman who had lived among them, but would also expose a truth so powerful it would echo through generations. Hello, my friends. I'm so glad you're here with me today. I want to share with you a story that has stayed with me since the moment I first learned about it. It's the story of a woman named Celeste, who lived on a cotton plantation in Mississippi during one of the darkest periods in American history. This is a story about courage, sacrifice, and a secret that was kept sacred for decades. I really hope this story touches your heart the way it touched mine. Now, before we begin, I need to be completely transparent with you. This narrative is fictionalized. The name Celeste, the specific plantation, and the individual characters you'll hear about are not real historical figures. However, and this is what makes this story so important, every single event, every situation, every act of resistance you're about to hear was a documented reality during the slavery era in the United States. These practices, these acts of courage, these underground networks actually existed and were recorded in plantation journals, freedmen's testimonies, and historical archives. Women like Celeste, even if that wasn't their real name, truly existed and performed these extraordinary acts of bravery. So while I'm telling you a fictionalized account, I'm sharing truths that affected thousands of real people during this period. The story begins in the spring of 1829 at Riverside Plantation, located along the banks of the Mississippi River, about 40 miles south of Natchez. It was a sprawling estate of over 2,000 acres, with cotton fields that stretched as far as the eye could see. The plantation was owned by Master Edmund Fairchild, a man whose wealth was built entirely on the labor of the 137 enslaved people who worked his land. Among those people was a woman who had arrived at Riverside in 1828. Her name was Celeste, though no one knew where she had come from or what her life had been before. She appeared to be in her late 20s with dark skin, intelligent eyes, and a quiet demeanor that made her nearly invisible to the white families. She worked in the fields during planting and harvest seasons, and in the big house during the winter months. What made Celeste different, what made her the subject of whispered conversations among the other enslaved people, was her ritual. Every single month, without fail, on the night of the full moon, Celeste would disappear into the woods that bordered the eastern edge of the plantation. She would be gone for several hours, sometimes until just before dawn, and she would return with dirt under her fingernails and exhaustion in her eyes. The other enslaved people noticed, of course. In a community where survival depended on knowing everyone's movements, where trust was currency and secrets could mean the difference between life and death, Celeste's monthly disappearances did not go unnoticed. An older woman named Ruth, who had been at Riverside for 40 years, was the first to approach her about it. It was late summer of 1829, and Ruth found Celeste washing clothes by the creek one afternoon. "Child, people are talking," Ruth said quietly, her hands never stopping their work. "They're wondering what you're doing out there every full moon. Some are getting scared. Some think you're practicing conjure, calling spirits." Celeste looked up, her expression calm. "I'm not calling anything harmful, Ruth. You have my word on that." "Then what are you doing?" Celeste was silent for a long moment, her hands stilled in the cold water. Then she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm keeping a promise. That's all I can say. I'm keeping a promise to people who need help." Ruth studied her face, seeing something there that made her nod slowly. "A promise worth keeping?" "A promise worth dying for," Celeste replied, and Ruth never asked again. More than that, she began to provide cover for Celeste, explaining away her absences to anyone who asked, creating small distractions on those full moon nights that drew attention away from the woods. What Celeste was doing, what she had been doing since her arrival, and would continue to do for the next 18 years, was serving as a keeper of the Underground Railroad. The woods where she disappeared each month contained a carefully hidden cache, a series of buried containers where she stored supplies for people escaping slavery. Food, clothing, maps, medicine, shoes, everything a person might need to survive the dangerous journey north to freedom. But Celeste's role was even more specific and more dangerous than simple storage. She was what was known in the network as a moon keeper, someone who maintained emergency supplies and safe information for conductors on the Underground Railroad. The full moon nights were chosen deliberately. They provided enough light for people to travel without torches, and the regularity of the schedule meant that conductors could time their routes to coincide with fresh supplies. The system worked like this. Conductors leading groups of escapees north would know the locations of various moonkeepers along the route. They would arrive on or near the full moon, following specific markers, a particular arrangement of stones, a carved symbol on a tree, a certain type of flower planted in a specific pattern. These markers would lead them to the burial sites where supplies were hidden. Celeste had learned this system from a woman named Sarah, whom she had met in New Orleans in 1827. Sarah had been a free woman of color who worked with Quaker abolitionists, and she had recognized something in Celeste: a determination, a quiet strength, a willingness to risk everything. "The network needs people in Mississippi," Sarah had told her during their secret meetings in the back room of a freedman's church. "It's one of the most dangerous states, but it's also where some of the largest plantations are. People are desperate to escape and they need help." So Celeste had gotten herself hired out to Riverside Plantation, presenting herself as a domestic worker available for purchase. Master Fairchild had bought her for $800, never knowing that he had just placed an Underground Railroad operative in the heart of his estate. For the first few months, Celeste had done nothing but observe and learn the patterns of the plantation. She studied the movements of the overseers, learned which enslaved people could be trusted, identified the safest routes through the woods, and located the best hiding spots. Then, on the full moon of March 1829, she had buried her first cache. It had taken her 3 hours that night, digging in the darkness, placing the watertight container deep enough to avoid discovery, but shallow enough to be retrieved quickly. Inside were cornmeal, dried meat, a map drawn on cloth that could be hidden in clothing, matches wrapped in waxed paper, and a small medical kit. Over the years, Celeste developed an elaborate system. She maintained 5 different cache sites, rotating between them to avoid establishing a predictable pattern. Each site was marked with symbols that only other network members would recognize: a certain way of arranging pine cones, a series of notches on a tree trunk, a pattern of stones that looked natural but conveyed specific information. The supplies came from various sources. Celeste was skilled at diverting small amounts of food from the big house without it being noticed. A handful of cornmeal here, a bit of salt there, a few strips of dried meat. Amounts so small that no single theft would be discovered, but over weeks and months it accumulated into life-saving supplies. Clothing came from even more creative sources. Celeste would volunteer to dispose of worn-out garments from the master's family, but instead of burning them, she would secretly repair them and include them in her caches. She collected shoes that had been discarded, patching them as best she could. She saved every scrap of fabric, every bit of twine, every item that might help someone survive. The maps were perhaps the most dangerous items she handled. These came from contacts in Natchez, passed through a chain of trusted people until they reached Celeste. They showed routes north, marked safe houses, indicated where to find water, warned of areas with active slave patrols. Possessing such a map meant certain death if caught, but Celeste kept them carefully hidden in her quarters until she could bury them with the other supplies. What struck me most when I researched this part of the story was the incredible attention to detail and the constant danger Celeste lived with. Every single month she was risking her life. If caught outside the quarters after dark, she could be whipped or worse. If her caches were discovered, she would have been tortured for information about the network, then sold away or executed as an example. But Celeste continued, month after month, year after year. The full moon became her signal, her calling, her sacred duty. By 1835, 6 years into her work, Celeste had helped supply over 40 successful escape attempts. She never met most of the people she helped. That was part of the safety of the system. Conductors would arrive, retrieve the supplies using the markers she left, and disappear into the night. Occasionally, she would find a small sign left behind, a specific arrangement of leaves, a carved mark, that told her the supplies had been successfully retrieved. But the work was taking its toll. Celeste was aging faster than her years. The constant tension, the monthly expeditions in all weather, the physical labor of her daily work combined with the secret labor of her mission, it was wearing her down. Her hands, once smooth, were now scarred and calloused from endless digging. Her back ached constantly. She had lost weight, and there were permanent shadows under her eyes. Ruth noticed, of course. By 1836, Ruth was one of the few people at Riverside who knew the general nature of what Celeste was doing, though not the specific details. "You're killing yourself," Ruth said one morning as they prepared breakfast in the big house kitchen. "I can see it. You can't keep this up forever." "I'll keep it up as long as I'm needed," Celeste replied, kneading bread dough with determined hands. "Every month I stop is a month someone might die because they didn't have food or a map or shoes. I can't stop. I won't stop." "And what happens when you drop dead from exhaustion? What happens to all those people then?" Celeste paused in her work, a flicker of doubt crossing her face. "Then someone else will do it. The network is bigger than any one person. If I fall, someone will take my place." But finding someone to take her place wasn't that simple. The work required someone who could move with relative freedom, who had the physical strength for the labor, who could be trusted absolutely, and who was willing to face death if discovered. Such people were rare. The turning point came in the summer of 1840. A young woman named Hannah arrived at Riverside, purchased by Master Fairchild from an estate sale in Louisiana. Hannah was only 19, but there was something in her eyes, a fierce intelligence, a determination that reminded Celeste of herself years ago. Celeste watched Hannah for months, studying her, testing her in small ways. She would ask Hannah to keep small secrets, nothing dangerous, just to see if she could be trusted. She would observe how Hannah interacted with others, whether she was thoughtful or impulsive, careful or reckless. By the spring of 1841, Celeste had made her decision. She would train Hannah to continue the work. The training took nearly 2 years. Celeste couldn't simply explain everything at once. It was too dangerous, too much information to risk if Hannah was caught and tortured. Instead, she revealed the network slowly, in layers, teaching Hannah one aspect at a time. First, she taught her how to navigate by the stars, how to recognize the North Star and use it for direction. Then she taught her which plants were edible, which could be used for medicine, which could poison and which could heal. She showed her how to move silently through the woods, how to cover her tracks, how to sense when danger was near. Only after all of this, after Celeste was absolutely certain of Hannah's commitment and capability, did she reveal the cache sites and explain the full scope of the operation. "This is bigger than us," Celeste told her on a full moon night in 1843, as they stood in the woods together for the first time. "This network stretches from Louisiana to Canada. There are hundreds of people involved, black and white, enslaved and free. Some are conductors who guide escapees, some are station masters who provide safe houses, some are donors who provide money and supplies, and some, like us, are moonkeepers." Hannah listened with wide eyes as Celeste showed her the first cache site, how to dig carefully to avoid leaving obvious signs, how to waterproof containers using tree sap and waxed cloth, how to leave markers that looked natural but conveyed crucial information. "Why the full moon?" Hannah asked. "Light," Celeste replied simply. "People escaping need light to travel safely, but they can't carry torches. Too visible. The full moon gives them enough light to see the path, to read the markers, to avoid snakes and other dangers. It's God's torch, lighting the way to freedom." Over the next 4 years, Celeste and Hannah worked together, with Hannah gradually taking on more responsibility. By 1847, Hannah was maintaining 3 of the 5 cache sites independently, while Celeste handled the other 2. But Celeste's health was failing. The years of labor, the inadequate food, the constant stress, and the physical toll of her secret work had damaged her body beyond repair. She had developed a persistent cough that wouldn't go away, and she was losing weight rapidly. In the fall of 1847, Celeste knew she was dying. She could feel it in her bones, in the way her breath came short, in the fever that never quite left her. She spent her final full moon night in October of 1847 in the woods with Hannah, checking each cache site one last time, making sure everything was in order. "You'll continue this," Celeste said. It wasn't a question. "I will," Hannah promised. "For as long as I'm able, I'll keep the promise. And when you can't anymore, you'll find someone to take your place. I will." Celeste died 3 weeks later, in early November of 1847, in the slave quarters at Riverside Plantation. The official cause listed in Master Fairchild's records was consumption, which was probably true. Tuberculosis was rampant among enslaved people, whose weakened bodies and crowded living conditions made them especially vulnerable. She was buried in the enslaved people's cemetery at the edge of the plantation, marked with a simple wooden cross that bore only her first name. Master Fairchild noted in his ledger that he had lost a worker worth approximately $600. Her value had depreciated from the $800 he had paid 18 years earlier. But Master Fairchild had no idea what he had actually lost. He didn't know that Celeste had been instrumental in helping over 80 people escape to freedom during her time at Riverside. He didn't know about the underground network, the cache sites, the maps, the supplies. He didn't know that the quiet, unremarkable woman who had worked in his fields and his house had been waging a silent war against everything he stood for. Hannah continued Celeste's work. She maintained the cache sites through the 1850s, adapting to the increased danger as tensions grew between North and South. When the Civil War broke out in 1861, the Underground Railroad network became even more crucial, now helping not just escapees, but also providing intelligence about Confederate movements to Union forces. Hannah survived the war and lived to see emancipation in 1865. She was 34 years old when slavery ended, and she had spent half her life continuing Celeste's mission. But the cache sites remained, buried and forgotten as the years passed. Hannah had told a few people about them before her death in 1898, but the information was vague. She had been protecting the network even after the war, never quite certain if slavery might somehow return, never quite able to trust that freedom was permanent. Then, in December of 1867, just 2 years after the war ended, something happened that would finally reveal Celeste's secret to the world. Master Fairchild had died during the war, and Riverside Plantation had been seized by the federal government as abandoned property. The land was being surveyed for redistribution to freedmen when the surveyor's dogs discovered something unusual beneath the old magnolia tree at the edge of the woods. The dog had been digging, as dogs do, and had unearthed the edge of something that looked like a container. The surveyor, a Union Army veteran named Thomas Cartwright, was curious. He began to dig, and what he found amazed him. It was a sealed metal box, carefully wrapped in waxed cloth. Inside were supplies, rotted cornmeal, rusted medical instruments, scraps of cloth that had once been clothing, and most significantly, a map drawn on treated leather that had survived the years underground. Cartwright recognized immediately what he had found. He had heard stories during the war about the Underground Railroad, about the elaborate network of supplies and safe houses. He kept digging, and over the next week he found 4 more cache sites, all within a quarter-mile radius of the first. Each contained similar items, and each was marked with symbols that Cartwright slowly learned to recognize. Symbols that indicated direction, safety, danger, and hope. But the most significant discovery came from the last cache site. Buried deeper than the others, wrapped in multiple layers of protective cloth, was a journal. The pages were stained and damaged, but much of the writing was still legible. It was Celeste's journal, kept secretly over years, recording her work. The entries were sporadic. She had only written when she had the chance, stealing moments late at night or early in the morning. But what she had written provided an invaluable historical record. One entry, dated June 15, 1835, read, "Buried supplies tonight. 2 loaves, dried pork, medicine kit, map to Memphis. Full moon bright. Saw 3 deer on way back. Hope it helps someone reach freedom. I am tired, but I will continue." Another, from September 3, 1842. "Hannah is learning well. She understands the importance. I pray she will carry on when I cannot. This work is bigger than my life. As long as one person remains enslaved, the work must continue." The final entry, dated October 18, 1847, just 3 weeks before her death, was particularly poignant. "My body fails, but my spirit is strong. I have kept my promise to Sarah, to the network. To all those who suffer in bondage, Hannah will continue. The moon will keep rising. Freedom will keep calling. I am ready to rest." Cartwright took his findings to the Freedmen's Bureau, the federal agency established to help formerly enslaved people transition to freedom. The journal and the cache sites became evidence of the Underground Railroad's operations in Mississippi, one of the few physical remnants of that secret network ever discovered. But more than that, they became a symbol. Word spread among the freedmen communities about what had been found, about the woman named Celeste, who had spent 18 years of her life maintaining these supplies, about her dedication and sacrifice. In 1870, the freed people who had once been enslaved at Riverside Plantation held a ceremony at Celeste's grave. They replaced the simple wooden cross with a stone marker, paid for with contributions from dozens of people. The marker read, "Celeste, Moonkeeper, 1801 to 1847. She kept the promise. Hannah attended that ceremony, now 49 years old, and she told the gathered crowd about Celeste's work, about the network, about the cache sites and the supplies and the maps that had helped so many people find their way to freedom. "She never asked for recognition," Hannah said, tears streaming down her face. "She never wanted glory or fame. She just wanted to help. Every full moon, no matter how tired, no matter how dangerous, no matter how difficult, she went into those woods and she buried hope in the ground, and that hope saved lives." The cache sites were preserved by the community, and in 1889 a group of historians from the North came to study them. They documented everything they found, interviewed Hannah and other survivors who had known about the network, and published their findings in a series of academic papers that helped establish the historical record of the Underground Railroad in Mississippi. But here's what I find most powerful about Celeste's story. She represents thousands of unnamed, unrecognized heroes of the Underground Railroad. For every famous conductor like Harriet Tubman, whose name we know and celebrate, there were hundreds of people like Celeste, whose names were never recorded, whose actions were never publicly acknowledged, but whose contributions were absolutely essential to the network's success. These moonkeepers, as they were called, existed throughout the South. They were the invisible infrastructure of the Underground Railroad, the people who made sure that supplies were available, that maps were current, that escapees had what they needed to survive the journey. They risked everything, and most of them died without ever being recognized for their extraordinary courage. Now, I want to take a moment to talk about the historical context of this story and its importance, because this matters deeply. This narrative is fictionalized. Celeste, as I mentioned at the beginning, is not a documented historical figure with that specific name, and Riverside Plantation is a created setting. However, every element of this story is based on documented historical practices and realities of the Underground Railroad during the slavery era in the United States. The role of moonkeeper or supply cache maintainer was a real position within the Underground Railroad network. Historical records, including testimonies collected by the Works Progress Administration in the 1930s from formerly enslaved people, document the existence of these supply caches. Plantation records, court documents from escaped slave trials, and letters from abolitionists all reference this practice. The full moon timing was a documented strategy. Escapees traveled primarily at night to avoid detection, and the full moon provided the maximum natural light for navigation. Conductors on the Underground Railroad deliberately timed their routes to coincide with the lunar cycle. The supplies described, cornmeal, dried meat, maps, clothing, medical supplies, match historical records of what was typically cached. Archaeological excavations at known Underground Railroad sites have uncovered similar items buried in waterproofed containers. The danger was absolutely real. Enslaved people caught helping escapees faced severe punishment, including torture, sail away from family, and execution. The risks Celeste took in this story were risks that real people took every single day. What makes this period of history so important to remember and study is that it demonstrates the power of ordinary people to resist injustice through extraordinary acts of courage. The Underground Railroad was not primarily about famous abolitionists or dramatic escapes. It was about thousands of people, many of them enslaved themselves, who made small, dangerous, consistent choices to help others find freedom. These were people who had every reason to keep their heads down, to focus on their own survival, to avoid additional risk. But they chose to help anyway. They chose to bury supplies in the woods. They chose to hide escapees in their cabins. They chose to pass along information. They chose to keep promises, even when keeping those promises might cost them their lives. This is why stories like Celeste's matter, even in fictionalized form. They remind us that resistance to injustice is not always loud or public or recognized. Sometimes it's quiet and secret and sustained over years. Sometimes it's digging holes in the woods every full moon. Sometimes it's keeping a promise to people you'll never meet. The slavery era in the United States, which lasted from 1619, when the first enslaved Africans arrived in Virginia, until 1865, when the 13th Amendment was ratified, represents one of the darkest chapters in American history. During those 246 years, millions of people were held in bondage, denied their humanity, separated from families, and subjected to unimaginable cruelty. But what stories like this one teach us is that even in that darkness, there was light. There was resistance. There was courage. There were people who refused to accept injustice, who fought back in whatever ways they could, who kept hope alive even when hope seemed impossible. The Underground Railroad, which historians estimate helped between 30,000 and 100,000 people escape slavery between 1810 and 1865, was a testament to that resistance. It was a network that crossed racial lines, that united people of different backgrounds in a common cause, that proved that ordinary people could challenge and undermine even the most powerful institutions. And crucially, it was a network that relied heavily on women. While the most famous conductors were men, the reality is that women played essential roles throughout the Underground Railroad. They were particularly important in roles like the one Celeste fills in this story, roles that required consistency, attention to detail, and the ability to operate without drawing attention. Women were often dismissed as less threatening by slave patrols, which gave them opportunities for resistance that men didn't have. So while Celeste herself may be fictional, she represents a historical truth about women's contributions to the fight against slavery. Contributions that were often overlooked or minimized in historical accounts, but were absolutely crucial to the success of the Underground Railroad. I want to emphasize that creating fictionalized narratives about this period is not about distorting history. It's about making history accessible and emotionally resonant. When we can imagine the lived experience of someone like Celeste, when we can picture her exhaustion and fear and determination, we understand the reality of slavery and resistance in a way that statistics and dates alone cannot convey. The importance of remembering and studying this history cannot be overstated. The legacy of slavery continues to shape American society today, in economic disparities, in criminal justice systems, in education, in healthcare, in nearly every aspect of American life. Understanding how slavery worked, how people resisted it, and how it was finally abolished is essential for understanding contemporary America and the ongoing work of creating a more just society. Moreover, stories of resistance like Celeste's remind us that change is possible. They remind us that individuals can make a difference, even against overwhelming odds. They remind us that justice is worth fighting for, even when the fight is difficult and dangerous. So, my friends, I hope this story has moved you the way it moved me. I hope it's given you a glimpse into the courage of people who fought for freedom in whatever ways they could. And I hope it's reminded you that history is not just about dates and events. It's about people, real human beings who loved and hoped and struggled and persevered. I'd love to hear from you. What did you think of Celeste's story? Does your family have histories from this period that have been passed down through generations? Do you know stories of ancestors who resisted slavery or who helped others find freedom? Please share them in the comments. These stories are too important to be forgotten, and I'm curious, where are you watching this from today? What city or state are you in? I love knowing that these stories are reaching people all over the country and all over the world. Thank you so much for being here with me today, for listening to this story and for caring about this history. If this video touched you, please leave a like and consider subscribing so we can continue sharing these important narratives together. Sending you all a big hug, and I'll see you in the next story. Take care, everyone.